Do you want to paint punchy bright red power armor? Do you apply 20 layers of red paint but your minis still look like a brown mess? Do you want to learn a new simple painting technique? Well, then this video is for you. Hi everyone and welcome to the Exalted Wargamer. Stan here, and today I'm going to show you my approach to painting bright red Blood Angels. In this small series of tutorials I'm painting different characters from the Horus Heresy, and today I'll paint Dominion Zephon, the bringer of sorrow, Blood Angels. And there are lots of different opinions on how 30k Blood Angels should look, and plenty of different painting approaches. Dark red, bright red, orangey highlight, pink highlight, gloss finish, matte finish, or even candy red power armor. But I personally like this kind of bright matte power armor with some hints of orange, quite weathered and maybe even bleached by the sun. I found inspiration in some old artworks from Visions of Heresy, and I even painted a test Space Marine to figure out how to paint in this style. I completely understand that it's not for everyone, and it may even look more like a depiction of Blood Angels from the Rogue Trader era of Warhammer or 2nd edition. But I really like it, and I'll show you how to achieve this bold red armor on your miniatures. So, without further ado, let's start painting. As always, first of all we need to prime our miniature. Here I'm using Vallejo Black Primer, spraying it in a couple of thin layers through my Harder and Steenbeck Infinity Sear Plus airbrush at about 30 psi. You can also use a rattle can primer if you want. The goal here is just to establish a solid thin coverage for better adhesion. Next, I'm going to make a preshade. What's a preshade, you may ask? Well, as you know, acrylic paints are semi-transparent, so when you apply them on a miniature, a bit of the previous layer is still visible and affects the look of the following layers. Different paints have different opacity, but lighter ones tend to be even more transparent than dark ones. And if you apply even a dozen of thin layers of yellow over black, it will still look kind of dirty. Let me show you how it works. Here I have two bases, one painted black and one painted white. Now I'm going to spray them with the red paint. See how the white one looks much brighter. Even too bright, it's more pink now. And the black one looks kind of dirty brown. I'll continue applying a couple more layers. Now we have a solid red color over the white base. And still quite a dark, dirty brownish red over the black one. So, the color of the underpainting is really important and affects all further layers. But we can use this knowledge to our advantage. If we establish a light sketch over a dark underpainting and then cover it with several thin layers of a third color, it will instantly create general areas of light and shadow with a new color. It's a really powerful technique, especially useful on big monochrome surfaces such as Space Marine armor or different sorts of vehicle. And if you're finding this breakdown useful so far, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel and share it with your hobby friends. It really helps the channel to grow, and you'll get more tutorials just like this. So, for the bright carmine red armor of our Blood Angels, I will use a metallic preshade. Yes, you hear that right, a metallic preshade. And because we are going to cover it with the regular acrylics instead of speed paints, it won't look like a candy red armor. For the preshade I'm using a medium metal color, not too dark and not too bright. Here you can see how I establish the light sketch by applying extra layers on the most prominent parts, such as jump pack, pauldrons and the back of the legs. In the shadow areas I sprayed just one layer of metallic, so it looks much darker. And here it is, our simple preshade established. Now we can finally spray the red over the armor. I started with a quite dark wine red. I diluted it well and sprayed it all over the miniature in several thin coats, drying them in between. and don't rush the process. At first it may look like a strange purplish pinkish color, but as you continue adding more and more semi-transparent layers of paint, it starts to look like a solid bright red. But that's not all. I think we already have a solid foundation, but we can make it even better. I decided to apply a zenithal highlight with a bright matte red over the preshade. I sprayed it at about 45-degree angle, aiming for the same prominent parts, the jump pack, chest and back of the legs. And the light sketch already looks quite good, and you can stop here if you want, but I decided to push the brightness even further. For the final highlight, I added a bit of orange cork color to the previous red and sprayed all the upper parts of the armor, focusing on the existing highlights and reducing the area of application a bit. And I overdo it. But nothing we can't fix. I simply went back with the previous bright red and sprayed where the highlights met, blending the transition a bit. Nice and easy. Now we can finally switch to the regular brush. First I want to add some edge highlights with the cork color to the armor. Yes, we're still working on the armor, but since it's the biggest part of the Space Marine and draw the most attention, I'm happy to spend a bit more time on it. Luckily, power armor is quite easy to highlight, because it has lots of hard edges. Try to hold the brush perpendicular to the edges and don't push too hard, just slightly touch them. Some areas such as the backpack and graves are quite large, so I added a few random dots and scratches here and there to break the monotony and add visual interest to these large empty spaces. At this point you might think the red armor looks a bit too orange. And yes, it kind of does, but we will dramatically change the look of the miniature with the next step, an oil wash. This will not only add strong definition to the recesses, but also apply an overall color filter to the red armor. I've covered this technique in a few previous videos, but not in great details. So, let me know, are you familiar with the oil washes? Do you use them in your paint jobs? Or would you like a dedicated in-depth video about oil washes? Write it in the comments. So, I mixed a bit of burnt umber oil paint with the white spirit, aiming for a thin wash consistency. Since the acrylics are completely dry and I want to affect the whole armor surface, there is no need to varnish before the wash. And I apply it little by little, letting capillary action to do the work, and trying to avoid pulling in the deepest recesses. After applying the wash, I left the miniature for a couple of hours to let the oil partially cure. Then I wiped the raised areas with makeup sponge, leaving the oil paints in the deepest recesses. You can see how dramatically the red changes. Now we have a rich bright red armor with great visual separation between elements. Next, I left the model to dry overnight, so the oils could fully cure. The following day I sprayed it with ultra matte varnish. First, because it's much easier to paint over the matte surface, and second, because I really like a matte finish on Space Marine armor. Now we can start painting the details. There are quite a lot of them, but in this tutorial I'll focus only on the main ones, common to the most 30k Blood Angels. Black details, steel and gold. Zephon has an exposed face and requires some basing, but that's quite individual and not critical to this tutorial. So let's start with the black details. And yes, surprise surprise, first we paint them black. Luckily there aren't many. The left pauldron, holsters, sword handle, some backpack details and the armor joints. Take your time and try not to mess up the surrounding red armor. Black is a quite opaque color, but it's still better to apply it in a couple of thin layers. And for the highlights I used dark green grey, a great color that contrasts beautifully with the bright red and is far more interesting than plain grey. I applied it with the light dabbing motions along the edges. On holsters it helps create an aged leather look, and on joints it keeps highlights of the recesses. Finally, I added some extreme highlights by adding a bit of warm grey to the previous color, keeping them subtle so they don't draw too much attention. And Zephon's left pauldron is meant to resemble the dark marble, not just black, so I decided to add some blue tones. I mixed some blue-grey into the black and covered most of the pauldron with slight dabbing motions. Then I added even more blue-grey and warm grey, painting irregular stripes and lightning shapes to recreate the marble pattern. It's not my best marble work. I usually use an airbrush and wet wipes technique for it, but since the pauldron was already glued on the miniature, I had to do it by hand. And if you have any tips for painting dark marble like this, feel free to leave a comment.
Next, we need to paint all the metallic parts, the blades, augmentics and decorative trims. I covered them with the gunmetal and rusty gold. Because these details are currently painted red, it's important to apply several thin coats to avoid red showing through. Alternatively, you can base coat these metal details black color first, but I find that tedious on such a detailed miniature. And to shade the metals, I'll use army painter washes, black tone for the steel and brown tone for gold. Apply it carefully and try to avoid pooling in the recesses. Let it dry for about an hour or speed things up with a hairdryer. Then we need to restore brightness by edge highlighting with natural steel and old gold, applying them as a light dry brush for texture and wear. I focused mainly on the sword, jump pack, exhaust and these decorative wings and studs. After that, I sealed everything with matte varnish again, to remove the wash glossiness. And to be honest, this varnish is more kinda satin, so don't worry, the metals will still look kinda bright. Finally, I dry brushed the base with several grays and added pigments. And for the blue gems, I use the same recipe as in my Thousand Suns video, so check it if you want to know the exact recipe. And now we are ready for the final reveal.
And here he is, Dominion Zephon, the bringer of sorrow in all his glory. I am really happy with how this bright matte red armor turned out. It's bold, punchy and has that slight weathered feel I was aiming for, inspired by classic Horus Heresy artwork. This approach isn't meant to be the only one to paint Blood Angel, but if you're struggling with flat or muddy reds, I hope these techniques give you a fresh perspective and something new to try on your own miniatures. So, let me know in the comments what do you think about this style. Do you prefer bright reds or darker one and rich tones? And next, in this Horus Heresy character painting series, will be Gregor Fell-Handed from the Space Wolves Legion. But that's all for today. Thank you for watching and see you soon. Bye.